people hear the word brandy, they usually imagine a heavy-set gentleman in a smoking jacket holding a snifter in one hand and a cigar in the other, especially in front of a roaring fire. Maybe that's where the idea comes from that you have to be rich to enjoy brandy. Or maybe it comes from hearing stories like the one about Henri IV heritage cognac. It comes in a crystal bottle that's been dipped in 24-karat yellow gold and sterling platinum. It's covered with 6,500 brilliant cut diamonds and it's aged for 100 years. Oh, and it costs about $2 million a bottle to boot. Brandy has a great reputation for a reason, though. And in this lecture, we'll see why. But don't worry, I'm not going to ask you to spend millions of dollars on a few bottles. We can find some very reasonable deals on a good brandy. In this lecture, I'll be talking about the following: whiskey, Cognac VS, Cognac VSOP, but I'll be tasting VSOP, but VS is fine, Armagnac, Cognac XO, and Calvados. If you're participating, you're going to learn how to enjoy and appreciate brandies straight and how to blend them successfully with something else. The better the brandy, the less inclined you're going to be to mix it, so have some cocktail options, and they can help you ease your budget while you develop your taste for these fine spirits. In this lecture, we'll create 3 cocktails, 2 classic recipes, a Brandy Alexander and a sidecar, and then one that's unusual but delicious, the Normandy. That one's kind of fun because it breaks the usual rules of what mixes well with cognac. We'll be working with yet another award-winning mixologist, John Hogan, to show us his tips for making these cocktails. If you've watched the other lectures in this course, you know that spirits are made from some sort of agricultural base. Brandy is unusual in that it gets its start from another alcohol, wine. The wine could have been made with grapes or other fruit, but the point is, brandy's based on fruit, whereas the other spirits have been based on cereals, grains, potatoes, or plants, as in the case of sugarcane and rum. This has such an impact on the flavor, but you can tell it's made from fruit. But don't take my word for it. Do this test yourself. Here I have 2 snifters, also called brandy balloons. They're filled with 2 different spirits. One, Scotch, the other one, cognac. You may want to try this at home, but when you do, just make sure you know which one is which. Now let's just do 2 of the 4 S's tasting these spirits, see and sniff. If you take notice of the color of these 2, you're going to notice they kind of look similar. They're both considered brown spirits. They're brown in color because they're aged in oak. Now sniffing. Remember, don't swirl and take a big sniff as you do with wine. Even though cognac is based on wine, it's not the same product anymore. You really could numb your nose by breathing in too deeply and then not smell anything after that. Also remember to keep your mouth open when you sniff. Do you notice anything different about these 2 spirits? You don't even have to taste them to know that they're different. You may notice that the cognac has more aromas towards the fruit end of the spectrum, for example, like dried orange peels, while the Scotch smells like cereal or grain, or smoke if you have a peated Scotch. Smell them again and see if you can notice these aromas now that I've mentioned them to you. It's quite apparent that the aromas are reminiscent of the base material used to make the distillate or spirit. Cognac's base materials are fruit, grapes, while whiskey, and in the case Scotch, comes from grain, barley, malted barley, and other grains. You see, only a few minutes into the lecture, and you can already tell the difference between a brandy and a whiskey. Many people think that the term brandy comes from the Dutch word brandewijn, or burned wine. That doesn't sound like something that you would want to turn out to be one of the world's premier drinks, does it? But in the 16th century, burnt wine was how the Dutch traders described this alcoholic beverage in their travels. The Italians, though, disagree. They claim that the term brandy came from the Piemontese word branda. Wherever the term brandy comes from, brandies are here to stay and are widespread. Perry Luntz, author of Whiskey and Spirits for Dummies, said it best. Put a map of the world on the wall, toss a dart, and no matter where it lands, you've probably hit a country that makes brandy. Brandies are made from all kinds of fruit, everything from apples to raspberries, but the most famous brandies are made from grapes in the regions of Cognac and Armagnac in France. The region of Cognac is on the western side of France, about a 2-hour drive north of Bordeaux. In the 1500s, this region made wine. This was around the time of Henry II of France, who was known for burning Protestant Huguenots at the stake or cutting out their tongues for heresy. So it's no wonder people living this time needed a stiff drink. It was about the mid-1700s when folks began shifting their drinking habits from wine to distilled spirits. The story goes that during the great age of exploration and trade, sailors burnt or boiled their wine to reduce the space it took up on their ship's hold. Later, they added water to it. But at some point, people noticed that the wine processed this way was actually quite good. Then they began deliberately doing what we call double distilling their wines. We'll get to this process in a minute, but first, let's learn about the wine that brandy comes from. Wine lovers talk a lot about grape varieties, and cognac, the king, or should I say queen, of brandy, is made from white grapes. 95% of the vineyards in Cognac are planted with a white grape variety called Uni Blanc, though in Italy, Uni Blanc is called Trebbiano. Uni Blanc is perfect for brandy production because of its high acidity. This provides the wine with more protection against microbes during the distillation process because the wines generally don't have sulfur dioxide added. Cognac is mostly made from Uni Blanc, but it may also have other white grape varieties. Folle Blanche is one example which might be used to get a little bit more floral notes, while Colombard is higher in acidity and highly aromatic. Cognac is divided into 6 geographic zones, each one known for its terroir characteristics. Terroir is a French term with no real true English translation. It includes the factors that make a wine taste exactly the way that it does from a specific location, and that includes soil, topography, inclination or slope of the vineyard, the sun, the rainfall, and other weather considerations. These factors combine to make the wine taste exactly the way that it does, and each region has its own set of characteristics. That's why the geographic origin of brandy is so important, and it's these terroir characteristics that get transferred over through the distillation process. The 2 best quality regions, or crus, in Cognac are Grande Champagne and Petite Champagne. Now, before you ask, Grande Champagne and Petite Champagne have no relation to the Champagne region known for making bubbly. All 3 wine regions are famous for grapes, and they all have chalky soil, but the name actually comes from the French word countryside, campagne. Grande Champagne and Petite Champagne are known for very floral notes for long aging characteristics. Have you ever wondered why some cognac is so expensive? Part of the explanation is supply and demand, but part of it is in the production process. It takes approximately 11.25 kilograms, or about 25 pounds, of grapes to make 1 liter of cognac. But you may be thinking, so what? Well, to put these numbers into perspective for you, it takes 1 kilogram of grapes, or 2.2 pounds, to make a bottle of wine. So it takes more than 10 times the amount of grapes to make cognac than wine. The type of still used for cognac is a pot still called a Charente still. This is a single batch system, and it's called a pot still because it has a pot where the wine boils. Traditionally, wine was placed in a liquid preheater. It's in this pot that the wine boils and the distillation process begins. The wine heats up, and once it goes past 173 degrees Fahrenheit, the alcohol starts to boil. And at this stage, the liquid is releasing alcohol, congeners, and flavor molecules into the air as vapor, where they're collected in the copper helmet above. The height of this neck, sometimes called the swan neck, affects the character of the distillate. The taller the neck, the lighter the character, because only the most volatile and lightest compounds can reach that high. So the shorter the neck, the heavier the character. All of these distillate molecules travel up the swan neck through the original liquid preheater, because those hot molecules are going to what preheats the wine, and to the condenser. The heated distillate molecules travel through a coil, and outside of this coil is surrounded by cool water, so this forces the temperature to drop, which makes all the compounds in the coil condense from a gas back into a liquid, which is then collected. This first pass through the pot still takes about 9 hours and yields a spirit that is about 26 to 29% alcohol by volume. 25 hectoliters of wine goes in, or about 660 gallons, but only 9 hectoliters, or 238 gallons of distillate comes out, so roughly a third. It's called a batch system because after the first pass or batch, the spirit needs to be added back to the still for more passes before it's at the right alcohol level and then ready to be placed into barrels. The distillate from the first batch is placed back into the still for a second pass. This takes about 14 hours. After each pass, the distillate gets higher in alcohol and lower in congeners. You're probably beginning to understand why cognac is so expensive. It takes more grapes, it's from a small region, and the process to make it yields only a fraction of output compared to that of the input. So let's go back to the process. Not all of the distillate is placed into barrels. It must be cut. Knowing how much of the heads and tails to take away is an art, and it significantly influences the taste of the resulting cognac. Once the cut is made, at about 58 to 60% alcohol by volume, the eau de vie is then ready to be placed into barrels. Eau de vie is a French term for distillate, but it literally means water of life. The eau de vie looks clear, kind of like water. So how do we get that rich color that you see in cognac, Armagnac, and other brandies? This color comes from the barrels and barrel aging. With cognac, the barrels are made of French oak. Just as with wine, the origin of the oak, the age of the barrels, and the length of time in oak all have a significant impact on flavor. Just because it's eau de vie from the region of cognac doesn't make it cognac. In order to be called cognac by law, the youngest eau de vie in the blend must be aged at least 2 years in barrel. Unlike wine, cognac is a blend of vintages. The master distiller checks how each barrel from each vintage is progressing and makes a judgment call on which barrels to blend with which. He or she may blend a 5-year-old cognac with a 15-year-old cognac to get the just intended flavors and the texture just right. On bottles of cognac, you're going to see various terms such as VS, VSOP, XO, Napoleon, and other terms. So what do these terms mean? Let's find out. VS means very special. The oldest cognac in that blend is 2 years. VSOP stands for very special old pale, and the minimum age for the cognac in this bottle is 4 years. Now for XO and Napoleon, it's 6 years. Let's compare two cognacs, a VS and an XO. As I said earlier, you can use a VSOP for this. Here I have them in brandy balloons, also called snifters. The large bowl allows for the aromas to be released and be captured as it narrows towards the top. Many people swirl the brandy in snifters because they think this is going to release more aromas. It does, but the alcohol notes are more volatile and they get released first, so there really is no need to swirl because those components are volatile enough and you'll probably smell more alcohol. You may also have heard the myth that you're supposed to warm up the snifter in your hands. You don't have to do that, but if you do, the heat from your hands warms up the cognac and makes the alcohol aroma stand out even more. And as I said before, don't swirl and sniff deeply as you would with wine. There is a real risk that you could anesthetize your nose. Now let's see. Do you notice a color difference between these two cognacs? The darker one is the XO, because the longer a spirit is aged in wood, the richer the colors get. Now let's take a sniff. You're going to notice a big difference between these two. And if you have a VS and an XO in front of you, I encourage you to smell one and then the other. Comparing and contrasting really helps you identify differences in tasting spirits. The VS smells more like fresh orange peels compared to some of the more dried ones in the XO. Some people say that the VS, particularly from Grand Champagne, has floral notes such as jasmine. And you may notice that there's more kind of toffee or caramel-like notes in the XO. As the spirits age, they take on more of these characteristics from the oak. Now let's take a sip. Now make sure you roll it around your tongue, and if this is your first sip, it may be a shock to your system. So Let your palate calibrate for a few seconds and then take another sip of the same cognac. You're going to notice that you will taste more. Now let's taste the second one. One tastes lighter than the other. Certainly, one tastes lighter bodied than the other. You'll probably notice that the XO, which has been aged for a longer period of time, tastes more dense and concentrated. Now savor. Unlike with wine, savoring a spirit like cognac may be more crucial than the initial impression when you sip, which is called the attack. High-quality spirits have a long length, meaning that the length of time the flavor lasts on your palate is quite long. It's these lingering flavors that really show the quality of a cognac and spirit in general. Cognac is probably the most famous and luxurious of brandies, but it's certainly not the only one. About 3 hours south of Cognac and a little east is the region of Armagnac, where they make the handcrafted and delicious brandy of the same name. It was first produced about a century before Cognac, and supposedly it was originally sold as a magical elixir with healing properties. It wasn't distributed as much as Cognac because the region of Armagnac is landlocked and Cognac has a river going through it. Like Cognac, Armagnac is made with white grape varieties, including Uni Blanc. However, the distillation process is a bit different. Let's try this test, and it's the same one we used in the whiskey lecture. Take a little bit of the Armagnac and pour just a dab in the palm of your hand. Now rub your hands together and smell your hands. Your body heat will evaporate the alcohol and leave only the essential aromas. Now smell your hands up close. You're going to notice all different types of aromas. What do you notice? Now that we've compared Cognac and Armagnac, let's learn how distillation affects the taste. We talked about Cognac's pot still batch system. One reason that Armagnacs taste different is that many of them are made with a column still, which is a bit more efficient. Now let's taste the difference. And taste the Cognac. And you're going to roll it around your tongue, and you're going to notice those dried orange peels, and it's a little bit floral. And now when you taste the Armagnac, you're going to notice a little bit more of an earthy type of flavor to it. They're both quite refined, but you're going to notice a little bit more of an edge to the Armagnac. What did you notice? These look just about alike in color, but the differences in distillation, grape varieties, and terroir show up in the flavor. You could probably tell that the Armagnac is generally richer and slightly fruitier than the Cognac. On the other hand, Armagnacs are a bit more rustic and lack the refinement and finesse of the Cognac. The aging for Armagnac is slightly different than that of Cognac, and unfortunately I have no secret ways of remembering the terms. Armagnac's VS is 1 year to Cognac's 2. VSOP is also 4 years, just like Cognac, and XO is 5 years, as opposed to the 6 in Cognac. The older, the more concentrated and dense, but remember, once it's out of the cask and in the bottle, it's done aging. You can store it standing up, so not on its side like wine, and it should keep for a very, very long time. There are other French brandies made from grapes, for example in the famous wine regions of Champagne, Bordeaux, and Burgundy, and each is required to be aged for a minimum of 1 year in wood. I said at the beginning of the lecture that brandy isn't always made from grapes. The French brandy called Calvados is made from apples, and it takes more than 30 varieties of apples to create its wonderful flavor. The same type of still is used as we see with Cognac, the Charentais pot still. There are similar aging requirements here with such terms as VSOP and XO that mimic those used in Cognac. If you've got some there, take a sniff. It's amazing how much it smells like fresh apples. I recommend you compare with the Cognac so that you get a sense of the impact of the different fruits. France isn't the only area of good brandies, of course. In fact, southern Spain may have created the first distilled spirit in Europe, made about 900 AD when distillation was introduced by the Moors in the creation of perfumes. In Spain, we see brandies in Jerez, in south and Penedès to the north. They make use of both pot stills and column stills, but by law, the final blend must contain a minimum of 50% spirit. The Spanish also aged their brandies in a unique system called the Solera system. The Solera is a system for blending. Think of it as a bunch of barrels tiered on levels. Each barrel contains a brandy of different age. Let's say we have 3 levels: Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3. When a new tier comes in, Tier 1, up to 33% of its contents can be removed at any one time to be placed in another tier, let's say Tier 2. However, some of the brandy from Tier 2 then moves down into Tier 3. The bottom tier is called the Solera, and it is the final blend. The interesting thing about the Solera system is that because the entire barrel is never really truly empty, because it's a fractional removal system, there's always a portion of very, very old brandy in the bottom tier. South America has its own brandy as well, called Pisco. Early Spanish settlers used more aromatic grape varieties than the fairly neutral Uni Blanc in France, so Piscos are known for their perfume and rich aromatic character. Peruvian Pisco is considered by many to be the purest and strongest because it's stored in casks that are lined with paraffin instead of aging in oak casks. We've tasted brandy's needs, so let's talk about cocktails using brandy. Because brandy is aged in oak and takes on some of its spicy aromas such as brown spice, nutmeg, or clove, it tends to add a spicy element to cocktails that makes them richer. Let's go see John Hogan so he can demonstrate how to make a Brandy Alexander, a sidecar, and a Normandy.
Today we're making a Brandy Alexander, a classic cocktail. The classic recipe calls for 2 ounces of heavy cream, calls for 1 ounce of creme de cacao, and 1 ounce of brandy. Today we're using Courvoisier. This is a VSOP. You're welcome to use a VS or VSOP. You don't necessarily need to use an XO. So we'll fill the mixing glass with ice, and then we're gonna shake it very hard. We wanna dilute the cocktail with the water from the ice. A nice shake for about 15 to 20 seconds will ensure that the cocktail gets cold and have the proper amount of water dilution. We'll take our julep strainer. And then we're going to finish the cocktail in a classic way with a fresh sprig or a little grating of nutmeg. Here we have the Brandy Alexander. We're making a classic sidecar cocktail. We're going to start with 3/4 ounce of fresh lemon juice. Now you may not have a press at home, but with a little strainer, we'll just press some fresh lemon juice in here. Make sure to strain it out so that you don't have the seeds or the pulp in your cocktail. 3/4 ounce of fresh lemon juice. Now this is a cocktail that classically doesn't call for simple syrup or a sweetener. If you like, depending on your taste, 1/4 to 1/2 ounce of simple syrup. Simple syrup is, in my case here, equal parts of water and sugar. We're going to use 1 ounce of Cointreau and orange liqueur. And 1 ounce of brandy. In this case, Courvoisier VSOP, a very nice cognac for blending cocktails. We'll add ice. And we're going to firmly shake for about 15 seconds. We want the dilution of the water from the ice in the cocktail. It's an important part of the drink itself. Now we're gonna sugar coat the rim of our already chilled cocktail glass. Just take a lemon half and Run the top with a little bit of lemon juice. Some fine sugar. And we're just gonna roll the top with a little bit of sugar. Now to finish the cocktail, we're gonna zest an orange. The essential oils in the outer part of the peel will float on top and give us a very nice aroma. This is a sidecar cocktail. Today we're making a brandy cocktail with Calvados. This drink is called the Normandy. We'll start with 6 fresh cranberries, 1 teaspoon of brown sugar, 2 slices of fresh green apple. We're gonna muddle these ingredients till we have a nice paste. For this type of muddle, it's important to have a muddler with grooves on the end. We'll next add 1/4 ounce of fresh lemon juice. And if you don't have a press at home, just a simple strainer so that we keep the seeds and the pulp out. 1/4 ounce of fresh lemon juice. Our sweetener for the cocktail is 1/4 ounce of simple syrup. This is a 1-to-1 ratio of sugar to water. And we're going to use 1.5 ounces of Calvados, which is a brandy from the French Calvados region. We'll ice our glass. We'll add ice to the cocktail. We're gonna firmly shake this cocktail to mix all of the ingredients. It's a very pretty cocktail. We're gonna strain this back over fresh ice. We'll add 3 cranberries right on top and 2 apple slices for our garnish. This is the Normandy cocktail.
All of those cocktails looked great and tasted great. I hope you agree. In the next lecture, we'll be talking about liqueurs. If you want to taste with us, you'll need the following: amaretto, drambuie, Cointreau, a generic triple sec, Grand Marnier, absinthe or absinthe, and chartreuse. Liqueurs with their huge variety of flavors are the widest ranging category of spirits. They're sweet, but some are spicy, others are nutty, creamy, earthy, floral, or even candied. The flavors seem limitless. While many are enjoyed as an aperitif or after meals, liqueurs are the endless spice rack that many bartenders and mixologists use. So until next time, cheers.